22%, so that's 1 in 5 investors are selling within the first year. What did your data uncover about landlords who sell within that 2 to 4 year period?
We've seen enough cases to see that, they'll get in and then they'll start learning very quickly. And in that learning, they'll learn two things. Do I want to stay in or do I want to get out? You also have the speculative investor. Happens to come to a chance and just jumps in and says, okay, let's see what happens.
This obviously has a major impact on tenant stability, for example.
This is becoming even more problematic because we're heading towards these what's known as single households. And that just adds more pressure.
This game of property investing, it's following what successful people do and it's avoiding what the unsuccessful people will do. And if you can see what the unsuccessful people are doing, cashing their chips too early, not having a very legitimate game plan around cash flow, for example, no mitigants around, say, insurances or thinking about separation. These are just considerations. G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Do you know that I have a real mission, and that's to help people become top 1% property investors? That means technically building a portfolio of 6+ properties. To do that, you need the right team around you, you need the right mindset, but also I talk about success leaving clues. But that also goes on the contrary, where we can look at maybe what poorer investors, bad investors potentially do as well, and what can we learn from those type of investors that don't succeed in this journey. I was very, very intrigued. I was actually on holidays with my family in Canberra watching the ABC, and there was this report that came out that said property investors will sell, what do they call them? Landlords would sell their property in about a 2-year mark, sometimes to 4 years, depending on how you cut the data up. That got me thinking. I'm like, that does not seem right, because on my watch, generally our investors are not selling and trading that quickly. And very much a big part of this report that came out from the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, HURI, I believe you'd call it. Dr. Ranjodh Singh joins us today. G'day, Dr. Ranjodh Singh. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here, Aaron.
Thanks very much. You're joining us all the way from WA.
Yep, over here in the West, Perth, WA.
Beautiful. Hey, mate, thank you very much. Look, you've obviously been a big part of this research. We're going to come out and unpack that data in a second. But for the people that aren't aware and haven't come across some of your work or yourself, do you just want to share with us a little bit about what your journey has been to date and a little bit of yourself personally, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do so. I kind of got into this. I haven't always been an academic. I did spend some time in the public sector and in the private sector as well before kind of joining academia. And it's usually in the space of in urban planning. I've had a shot at that. Then in banking, where I've kind of worked in a sort of risk management role. And then finally, I decided to come and do some further studies at university and enrolled myself into an economics department, and sort of took it from there. Obviously, I didn't forward plan any of this, but when I look at it in reverse, it kind of makes sense why I did what I did. But
yeah.
I don't think there was an element of forward planning in this, but backward planning, it makes perfect sense. So yeah, that's me. And I'm sort of interested as a sort of a social scientist about people's behavior generally. So housing is one area that I research. Some other areas that I've done as well, which aren't probably as popular. But those who look me up will find all sorts of, different research angles, especially on recreational drug use as well. That was another paper that I had last year, which took off and did really well in terms of, once again, behaviors, how people respond to different policies and regulations in this space. But housing is sort of close to the heart of many Australians, and I think we ought to look at it a little bit more carefully.
Yeah, perfect. So your role at the moment, you're at Curtin University. That's your primary focus. I know you've worked with Bankwest in the past as well. You do it with Bankwest, and then you have this role with the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute too. So this report, and it's called Modelling Landlord Behaviour and its Impact on Rental Affordability, which is insights across 2 decades. So there's a good data set that you're working with here, that it's not just in the last 5-10 years maybe. We're going across the last 20 plus years on data And if I just start with a couple of key statistics that I've pulled out in this report. So in 2001, 7% of the Australian population were landlords. Fast forward to 2021, and that's 9% of the population. So you think in that time, between 2001 to 2021, 20 years, there's been the advent of, social media. There's been podcasts in that time as well. So people haven't been short on resources, but really it's only moved the needle 2%, the increase in actual landlords. That to me probably surprised me coming out of that. But I guess the big kicker in this, and the reason we're chatting today, is half of all residential investment properties last for 2 years. And the average investment period is nearly 4 years. Now, I want to start there and say, what did your data uncover about landlords who sell within that 2 to 4 year period?
Let me just start with your first comment, because I find that interesting as well. The one about the 2% increase. So percentages sometimes can be misleading, or probably not misleading, but kind of undermine what's really happening. But if you talk in terms of numbers of people, remember, because when we look at numbers, because remember, over this 20-year time period, the Australian population has grown by quite a bit as well, right?
Yeah.
So the denominator to work out that percentage, the number of landlords over the total population, that denominator has been increasing as well. But if you just look at the numbers purely, right? So from the last 20 years, from 2000 to now, the number of investors has gone up by 1 million in Australia. So it was about 1.1 million. Now it's about 2.2, 2.3 million in 2021. That is.
Yeah.
So purely the numbers. If you just look at the numbers, the percentages are fine. They're correct, what you've called.
Yeah.
But just the number jump is also something to kind of think about. So we've gone up by just over 1 million people who've got into investing. And it is a kind of it is of national interest. Over time, this interest is becoming more and more. The Australian psyche has this idea of, once I get my own home, there are a set of people that are thinking, why not just buy the house down the street, so to speak? I mean, this is not thinking very pragmatically about how to invest, but there's always this idea that, hey, we can just buy, down the street, and we've done really well. We've got equity here, so we should just try and get something like that. And that sort of leads me into the next question that you had, which is this idea of how people get into investment. They all have kind of different stories about how they get into investment. Usually the stories are driven by success stories. For example, someone's uncle or someone's aunt in the family has been a property investor, and look how well they've done. Because and historically they have done well. There's no denying that, right?
Yeah.
And so people sort of latch onto that, and then you even look at our politicians. Whenever if you take an interest in some of the information they've declared that's public, I think it's safe to say just over 2/3 of our politicians, federal politicians, are property investors, right? So and they have to declare these things, and so that's another kind of thing that people observe, that these guys know what they're doing, and they seem to be leading the nation, and so property investment is sort of this angle that people take based on what they say. So I believe everyone enters into this journey from different points. Right? With different mindsets. Like you said, you use the word mindset. So maybe I can sort of generalize to that. They all enter with a different mindset. And it's not necessarily a mindset that's sort of, that savvy, informed investors have, which is, I have a specific goal. So usually in economics, we have two types of investors. Not two, maybe they're broader, but let's just fit them into two broad sets. One is what I would say the utilitarian investor. They have a need. So I want another house so that in the future I can, sell it and do something else with the money. Right? Sure. And then you also have the speculative investor who just happens to come to a chance and just jumps in and says, okay, let's see what happens. I have the means, I have the ability to get into the market, and I just want to punt and see what happens. Right? I mean, it's a massive punt, but yes, that's the attitude still, right. I believe, at least anyway. So So if you consider that people are entering with different mindsets, it's natural then to consider that the outcomes will also be different, right? Because the entry point into this game, into the property investment game, is so varied that will lead to a whole variety of different outcomes. Now, of course, this is not static. This is an evolving picture. Some people, once they get in, they start learning a lot, but only after they get in, right? Some more educated ones might sort of think about what they're getting into and plan prior to getting into it. That's one. But we've seen enough cases to see that, they'll get in and then they'll start learning very quickly. And in that learning, they'll learn two things. Do I want to stay in or do I want to get out? Right. And I think, and that's the sort of a second level differentiator of what types of people get out. And the ones that get out, once again, there are legitimate reasons and there are more life comfort reasons of getting out. So the legitimate reasons could be simple as, incomes fall. So at the time of entering the investment, your income is great. You get in. Sometimes you have what's known as honeymoon kind of interest rates to sort of get you in, which is fine. I mean, everyone deserves a nice rate to get in. But eventually, once those things finish, then they find themselves struggling to pay, and they're not prepared to do that. And so it might be the case that I'm done. I don't want any of this. This is compromising too much of my sort of, lifestyle, or whatever else you want to call it. So, or there can be other social demographic factors other than income. There can also be, sickness coming in. They get sick along the health reasons. Another one is marital status. If there's even a breakdown, I mean, that we see that time and time again. Pretty much all our modeling shows that when something like this happens, it's very, very difficult to hold on to investment property. So these are some of the legitimate reasons as to why people in the very short run might just say, okay, I'm done. And then the subjective ones might be that they can continue to afford it, but on one hand, they're thinking to themselves, well, this is really affecting my lifestyle. Prior to owning this behemoth, I was actually enjoying life. I was going on trips every year. There was a holiday or two. I wouldn't think before I spend. Now this is making me think, and that's one differentiator that you see. Every month there's an article somewhere, in Australia pointing out, the merits of a disciplined investor, someone who's had a nice success story. And the word they use strongly is discipline, that I stuck with it. I know it was hard yakka, but I stuck with it. And this is what today I'm living the fruits of that. And so, I mean, maybe sometimes it could be as simple as that. If you stick with it, even through a hard time, you might come up the other end.
Cool. Thanks very much. I think you've touched on a number of good points there. So when I looked at your research, employment issues, health concerns, marital breakdowns, for example, they're all very much core reasons that you go, you can't hold on to it. You actually have to sell the asset. Fair play. The next ones that come into it are interesting. They're more demographic. So aged 45 to 54, which can almost speak to separations at that stage as well, or aged under 35. That's what you're talking about, a bit of pain around cash flow. The next one is unemployment. Have a lower income. So again, I've got an asset on paper, but I don't feel richer cash flow wise, and you can't eat the capital growth, which becomes a challenge for investors. And the other one is they don't have post-school qualifications. And I think that almost talks to an ability to have like an income that can step up over time. So if you talk about having some qualifications, you pretty much have a path that the income's going to go once you get, job skilled. You can add a few more strings to your bow, and you have maybe a corporate career versus if your income is capped with your type of occupation. It makes it very hard because you've only got certain net income to work with as well. So I think that when you unpack those reasons, you can connect the dots to go, okay, that makes sense. The other one is higher income, higher mortgage costs, and that is obviously as rates have gone up, the 13 interest rate rises will do that to a lot of investors. But This research stops at 2021, which doesn't speak to probably the last 2 and a bit years where we had those high interest rate rises as well. And that's where you got to draw a line in the sand around the data to go 2021, we didn't see the rapid rate rises that we did in the last couple of years. Now, we said here, and again, I'm going to share with you a lot of the data here. The median holding period for a rental property is just 2 years. The mean is 3.9 years. So if you're like me and you didn't do well at statistics and quant over at university, like I struggle with, can you just unpack the difference between the mean and the median and why we get a difference in that amount, please, Ranjodh?
Yeah, sure. So median value, very simply put, you can think of the median value as the middle value of your data if you were to arrange the data in ascending order, right? So there'll be people who have 0 investment years, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 20 plus. And if you arrange that in kind of ascending order and you pick out the middle of that data set, it'll be around the 2 mark, right? And of course, this has got what's known as a skew in it, and the skew meaning that the median and the mean differ. I mean, people obviously always report the means because that's something everyone easily understands, and it's kind of the middle value where the data is balanced. You can think of that way for the mean, and so people usually report that and say, hey, the mean is around 4 years, and say, oh, okay, well, most people hold it for 4 years, but that's not the right statement to make here. Most people are actually holding it for less than that. It's just that 4 is the mean because we have almost 28-30% on the other end of the tail where people are holding it for much longer durations.
Yeah, correct. So you've really got these 2 distinct type of investor profiles. Like you said, you've got the short term, which are almost these churners. And when we look at the data, 22% are selling within the first year. That blew my mind when I read that statistic. And this is me not tooting our horn here, but in my brokerage, I'd be hard pressed to find a client that's selling their investment property within the first year. Very hard pressed. So something definitely has gone wrong there. Some wheels have fallen off, whether that's health, job, poor performance on the property, something's fallen off. That 22%, so that's 1 in 5 investors are selling within the first year. So if you're an investor and I won't say you're competing, but let's just say you look at the other investors that are in the cohort with you, if you can hold on for after 12 months, you've beat 22% of investors that are going to cash out within the first year. In the first year, you got to think stamp duty, probably buyer's agent in there as well, legal costs, and then to cash out in the first year, you're paying full whack on CGT as well, a higher CGT amount, and then you've got real estate agents selling costs. I'd be hard pressed to find that you'd make a profit within the first 12 months. And obviously the data I don't think goes into that level of detail, but you just do the numbers and you go in and out costs, holding costs, you need that probably to do some serious heavy lifting in that 1 year to cash in your chips and exit a market as well. And that's why I say I don't typically see it. Some clients will go and revalue properties in the first 12 months, pull the equity and go again if they bought a growth asset, versus 28% of investors who are holding for over 20 years. And so there's a real distinct, like you said, there's 2 groups, long-term holders versus these short-term churners. You got to think to trade property, it's a very expensive in and out cost. Don't you agree?
I definitely agree. And I actually, believe it or not, I hear exactly what you're saying regarding, what you see. But you have to remember that there is a kind of a perspective that I want to bring into here. So people who manage their clients well, if you're a brokerage or a boutique bank or investment bank, people who manage their clients well often will start from step 1, and that is they will select their clients well, right, to begin with. If there's even a small indication that this client might not be able to hold on to things, or there's a risk that it won't pan out for them, you will either do one of 2 things. You'll either say, hey, Mike, it's too hard for you to get in right now. Try and improve these things and then come back and we'll have a chat. Or you'll say, okay, what else can we kind of do to buffer this? So that perspective that you bring to your clients is very, very kind of helpful in getting the results that you see. And that's what will happen for boutique banks as well. Like if there's a bank that does its job really well in selecting the clients, then chances are that those clients are going to be in it for much longer term. What we're talking about is are people that probably were not selected appropriately, I would say, not calling out people who are not doing this badly, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And not following up with them, they might look great at the time of application, but 6 months down the track, that check-in, how are you going? With your base, you can do that, but maybe not everyone's in a position to do that. And that check-in is very important. And that's how I think people grow their businesses, because if they can get people, and once again, I bring this to a mindset, if you can get people to kind of align with your mindset, with your values, and bring them into your business, then you are going to keep them, and you are going to ensure that quality comes in. But that doesn't happen everywhere else.
Yeah, well said. And guys, those listeners have been around for a while, you'll hear me talk about the game of investing as a game of grip strength. It's an ability to hold on through the good and the bad times. And where this kind of weaves back into the data is a higher rental yield reduces the odds of selling. So again, this is all data. So a 1 percentage point increase in rental yield reduces the odds of selling by 8%. So again, if you can hold on, and a lot of the rental laws have changed that you can only do annual rental increases, or only at the end of a lease term when you go to renew it or get a new tenant in there. So I think the rental laws have changed, that it's probably very fair to a tenant, but it has changed the game probably in landlords that will continue to jack up the rent. But if you can increase your rent at the right time, market appropriate, in line with what's acceptable as well, it reduces your odds of selling. So over time, what I generally tell a lot of our clients is, ideally we see your income go up, hopefully we see rates come down, and then we see rental income go up over time. And it's a real sweet spot where you will be negative. Any client that's buying right now in this market, I would dare say they're going to be negatively geared, particularly if they're bought at 100, 105% lens. So they put zero cash down, finance the whole property and stamp duty. You will be negatively geared. But if you can hold on, a few more rate cuts to come, your income can go up, and then the rental income can go up. You've just got to be able to hold on to this period through this 1 year mark. And it's probably this big thing for a lot of our investors. Push through this 1 year mark and you'll be 22% of investors. And then you pushed yourself into another echelon of investor. Great. You've crossed one hurdle. Now it's the game just to keep going and holding on. I would only really advocate for selling if, one, the property was a strategic asset that you bought to a get in and get out market. That's cool. If the property is an absolute dud and it's costing you a lot of money, repairs and maintenance, there's nothing you can do to kind of polish it up at that point. Maybe cut your losses or just at that moment sell it. Or two, if it's done its job in your portfolio and you bought it specifically for a reason to then do its job and enter that market and exit, that's probably where we really look at tactical and strategic selling. Don't sell because you can't afford it. Find ways to speak to your broker. Find ways to speak to your accountant. We've spoken about so many ways. Your PAYG, tax withholding variations, for example. Go to interest only. Where we're pumping cash into an offset account, for example, to help with cash flow. That's the game. The game is cash flow and holding on. And this data is absolutely critical to helping you succeed as an investor. When we talk about, say, policy, and this is probably an interesting part that, I think for a lot of punters, they go, well, policy doesn't really affect me too much. Well, it does, in the sense that, talk about stage 3 tax cuts when they came out, they helped. Rate cuts will help. Increased borrowing capacity will help with a yield perspective as well. There was also the talk around CGT discounts as well. Do you want to touch on some of these, I guess, the policies that you looked at and the simulations that you did there as well, Ranjodh?
Sure, yeah. Look, broadly speaking, we had sort of 3 policies that we wanted to look at carefully. 2 were what I would call fiscal. Fiscal meaning, these are kind of from a tax perspective. And the other one was from a sort of a monetary policy. That's the interest rates, right? So 2 fiscal, which included taxes, and one monetary policy. Now, with these policy scenarios, remember what we've done is a specific policy scenario. So when the report makes a recommendation, that doesn't mean that means that taxes will do this. What we're saying is, if you do something very specific to the tax regime, then this is the kind of range of outcomes that you would get, right? So it's not to say, and for example, with the monetary policy, we didn't necessarily increase or decrease the interest rates. What we said was we would keep the interest rates steady from 2018 onwards, right? We'll keep them flat, and then and rather than and then compare them to what actually happened, which was a loosening of the interest rates, to kind of cope with the COVID crisis that we were having. What would have been the impact if we did these things? So what we find is that the fiscal measures, the two taxes, whether it be the capital gains tax as well as the stage 3 cuts, these probably had bigger impacts relative to the monetary policy. That's not to say monetary policy didn't have an impact; it did, but relative to that, the tax regimes had much better much higher impact compared to the monetary policy. So people, the reason why we chose these is because in politics, in political circles, people have talked about these things. So like halving the discount for the CGT is something that various governments have bought on. And you're thinking to yourself, well, do you really want to do this? Because, is this a good idea? And so we want to measure the impact that this will have. And once again, this is based off modeling. These are estimates. But broadly speaking, you can imagine if you halve that discount from 50% to 25%, you can pretty much imagine, your kind of return on that property is less compared to what it would have been if that hadn't taken place. So that kind of, and the way and the mechanism, if you like, or the channel through which this happens is your holding costs increase, right?
Yeah.
So you're holding onto that property, that sees an increase. And once you increase the holding cost of an investor, you're making it harder for them to kind of keep it on. I mean, some of them who are financially well balanced can keep it on, but some might tip over the edge, right? So that was an example of what would happen in that case. And same thing with the tax at stage 3. Stage 3 is on the positive end. It basically gives you more disposable income. Well, once again, that increases your ability to hold on to a property, and that's good, right? And then we see that people are not letting go. If we had done that, so we had this counterfactual that imagine if this was done in 2001, we didn't waste time with all this talk over the last 20 years. We just did it. And then what would the result be? And the result would be, well, people would hold on, right, longer. And that was the whole premise of doing this, because end of the day, I mean, there's an angle to this. It's like the purpose of investing, sure, it's very helpful for the investor themselves and they should do it. But the service they're providing, I never try and discount that. The service that they're providing is they're providing a house for someone to live in. It's actually a proper service. We need that service, and more so than ever.
Right, well said. And that was exactly kind of what I want to get to the next point, which is what this means for tenants. So you've got this like landlord that will transact and sell that short-term turnover, but someone's in these properties, and that's a tenant that has this turnover. Now, if that property is now sold to an owner occupied, the tenant now has to vacate, for example. And again, guys and girls, if you followed my journey on the podcast, you'll know that my rent investing journey came to an abrupt end when Bernadette was pregnant with our second, and then the landlord gave us notice to move out. And I said, that's it, never again. It'll be different reasons for other people why they choose to buy their own home versus continue rent investing. But I just valued security and stability. And again, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, but it's a common crossroads that a lot of investors will get to, going, where does my rent investing journey end and where does my home ownership journey start? Have a think about it. It's got to be right for you and the situation that you're in, just to kind of bring that back to everyone. But I want to touch on what this means for tenants, because this obviously has a major impact on tenant stability, for example, and well-being for tenants. So again, what did your research uncover when you're talking about the impact this has on tenants?
Yeah, definitely. So that was another piece of research that I was involved in, led by somebody else. But the idea, that the word that we're looking for here is precariousness. That sense of precarity, that am I going to be here? Does this give me stability to stay here? or will I be just given a 4-week notice and given my marching orders, right? And so that's been a challenge, and that challenge is ever more present today than it has ever been throughout our history, right? Especially if it's a well-located property. In these days, it doesn't even need to be that well-located. In the past, you look at the vacancy rates in the rental market, and if it's not well-located, you're missing out big time. Like that can break you, right? I'm talking about the early 2000s, possibly mid 20-teens, where badly located investments cause a lot of suffering for investors. I mean, eventually growth came into that area and it was okay, but in the initial years, to find a suitable tenant was hard for them. So, I mean, we're talking about well-being here, so we should talk about the well-being of investors as well as well-being of tenants as well. But definitely with the tenants, the big thing, the precarious nature of this means that they can be told that they have to leave at any time, and this is becoming even more problematic because we are heading towards. I hope I'm not going offline here. We're heading towards these what's known as single households, right, where there's actually only one person renting, just one, right?
Yes.
And the kind of rental stock that's available is kind of limited for that type of dwelling, right? So, I mean, maybe a one person can afford or used to be able to afford a 3x2 or a 4x2 and it wasn't so bad. But now it's not feasible at all for one of these single households. So that now the sense of stability is even more compounded because now they've got to find people to kind of, go on this rental journey with them because, and that just adds more pressure because you knock one house out and you might potentially knock 2 or 3 renters out, not just one.
No, nicely said. Yeah, it creates all different dynamics in the market. So, you then talk about having to live with housemates, and some people want to live solo. And you talk about where does this kind of factor in well-being? Well, now you've got to accommodate other house people that used to look, I want to live on my own, and now you're navigating being back at 20-something with housemates. So, I think the stability, the well-being part is like it can fly below the surface a little bit, but it's a conversation that probably needs to become at the top. Going, when we're transacting, we're actually moving people out of these properties. There is a knock-on or domino effect to that. I mean, I have people that have single parents that are around the corner from a school. Their life is set up, property now gets sold, or they're given notice. They've got to uproot their kids or their family and find a whole new thing. And like the empathy levels aren't there sometimes. We understand there are people at the end of these transactions and these purchases and buy and sell, for example, that not the reason to do it or not do it, but just being aware and being mindful of it as well. I think there's a little bit of empathy doesn't go astray. Look, there's no secret. There was this great graph recently, the AFR, showing about the lack of construction. This is not anything revolutionary information that I'm sharing. We all know it. We are well behind the 8 ball when it comes to new builds that the government's proposed and our targets. So clearly there's a lack of stock being built that's not soaking up the current level of demand, let alone the future. So when we talk about long-term projections, and effectively that's where you talk about the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute, that's probably a bread and butter topic that they're talking about, shortfall in housing over the next decade. So based on, I guess, your projections and your crystal balling, Ranjodh, like what does this mean for households? What does this mean for investors, for example, that we still have this long catch-up game to be playing around construction?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, totally agree. It's not a, it's not a secret that we kind of sustain current levels of demand, and let alone future demand. And the government has thrown, in the election promises, promised the sky that they're going to be this many dwellings built in record time and everything will be okay. And then there's also the idea of social housing, and it'll come on board and it'll do this and that. And I think they do have good intentions, but one of the things that I don't know if people are aware necessarily is really the lack of skilled labor force to build these things.
Yeah, nice.
Right? So that is really, we need to get these people from somewhere, either to kind of develop their skills within our country here right now. Let's get our, young people to get into trades or get into the building industry, or bring them from, source them from around the globe. That is the critical thing. I mean, they had a quote. It was like 1 million plus workers and they barely got 100,000. Like,
Wow.
and so it's not going to happen. And that's the constraint. I think the will is there, but that's the constraint. And then the other thing that no one talks about enough, although some media pieces picked up, is the quality of the stock that's coming on.
Well said.
And
well
investors
said.
have to be concerned about this. Your investors need to be concerned about the quality of the stock.
Yeah, which almost then is a flight to quality, which is more established stock in established areas. Yeah, I mean, we'll see it time and time again. You'll hear horror stories of the brand new builds. They're built really quick. This is not me taking a pot shot at brand new. We need developers to come in. We need builders to come in. But when it's quick and dirty and moved in very, very fast to get it from the ground up, and you're trying to cut costs somewhere, compromising the quality, because you've got to look at trades. I mean, I think there's some of those viral, TikTok videos, how much you're earning and you're a trader, you're earning $150,000. Okay, fair play, you earn your money, but that's a fairly decent income for that field where they weren't traditionally that high level of income. So when you're paying tradespeople at that level, the margins shrink. Builder risk is rife. I'd say to any client out there at the moment, anyone that's undertaking a build, a renovation, for example, their number one question isn't, can I get the money? It's, can I trust the builder to complete? Because the amount of builders that are falling over, insolvency, can't complete a project, and the builder risk now becomes the number one critical part to this. You got to imagine that's amplified from a government perspective role, and they're trying to entrust them to build these properties. Builder risk becomes the absolute crutch here that could knock over this house of cards. So if you kind of got the outlook here, where I'm trying to weave this back to the topic of, hey, how can you do well? Established properties, good areas, growth locations. I would absolutely be trusting a buyer's agent. I think I've spoken to quite a few clients that time poor that are trying to do it themselves, and market opportunity just keeps missing them by. I'm a very big, staunch advocate for a buyer's agent, as I am, a strategic broker, as I am a property savvy accountant, as I am a very switched on financial planner. You will only rise to the standards of your team. And if I go back to this 22% of investors that cash out in the first year, look, this is not any quantitative or qualitative that goes into it, shooting from the hip. I dare say they're DIY investors that bit off more than they can chew, and they just couldn't chew like crazy. And the only way for them to get out was to sell and exit a market and probably cop a fair, decent loss on that. Otherwise, they would have been able to hold on. If they could see there was a gain to be made, they could potentially hold on. I get it. Marriage, divorce, settlements, whatever it's gone, health. But 22% of property investors, I don't think are going to be struggling with those dynamics. I think there's a lot more at play here as well. So, Ranjodh, I want to say thank you very much for jumping in. I really appreciate you kind of sharing your knowledge. I saw this article and I thought there's no way I can kind of let this go without going a little bit deeper on it. So thank you very much for your contribution. I'll be watching out for some more articles that you put out, and hopefully in the future we'll get you back on and kind of deep dive into some of the research that you're doing as well. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Aaron, and I'd love to come back and maybe say my 2 cents for your listeners and yourself.
Love it. We love getting experts. Like I said, we'll go far and wide to get experts that come in very much, because this game of property investing, how do you become 1%? It's following what successful people do, and it's avoiding what the unsuccessful people will do. And if you can see what the unsuccessful people are doing, cashing their chips too early, not having a very legitimate game plan around cash flow, for example, no mitigants around, say, insurances or thinking about separation. These are just considerations that it's like, hey, if I'm running a business, I'm looking at my risk. I'm looking at my profile around risk and how do I minimize the risk that I'm going to experience. Have a conversation with an investment, like a real strategic broker. I'm going to start there, know your numbers and know your options as well. So guys, girls, if you found that helpful, if you know someone that wanted to get into the market, maybe someone that's sold and go, hey, look, was this your experience? Share this episode with them. We love when what I call the ripple effect starts to get bigger and bigger with people sharing our episodes as well. I love it. And for people that do reach out, I'm always here to have a chat. I genuinely want to help more people that are kind of tuning in and dialing into this podcast as well. So please do reach out if you want a property strategy, you want a roadmap around scaling up your portfolio. We are here to help. Ranjodh, thank you very much. That's a wrap for another episode with the Australian Property Investment Podcast. We'll talk to you soon.